This World War II naval battle is often remembered as a heroic last stand. But the official records describe something more complex, more chaotic, and far less certain. According to U.S. Navy after-action reports and later historical studies, an unexpected encounter took place off the coast of Samar on October 25, 1944. The details exist in logs, signals, and survivor accounts, but they do not fully agree. Understanding what actually happened explains why this moment still challenges historians today. In late October 1944, the Pacific War had reached a critical phase. American forces had returned to the Philippines. The landing at Leyte was underway. Naval forces were stretched across a vast operational area. The Japanese combined fleet under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita was moving toward the Philippines with a powerful surface force. It included battleships, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers. Among them was Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. Kurita's mission was to attack Allied invasion forces at Leyte Gulf. The plan relied on multiple converging forces. Confusion and miscommunication were built into the operation from the start. On the morning of October 25th, Kurita's force emerged unexpectedly off Samar. In front of it was not the main American battle fleet. It was a small task unit, Task Unit 77.4.3, known by its radio call sign as Taffy 3. Taffy 3 consisted of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts. These ships were designed to support amphibious landings. They were not designed to fight battleships. Their primary mission was to provide air support for troops. Ashore, they carried aircraft, not heavy armor. Their guns were light. Their speed was limited. They were not expecting to encounter a major enemy surface force. At first contact, confusion dominated both sides. American lookouts sighted masts on the horizon. Initially, they were not identified as enemy battleships. Within minutes, it became clear that something was very wrong. Kurita's force had appeared directly between Taffy 3 and the open sea. The disparity was immediate and severe: heavy cruisers and battleships against escort carriers, large-caliber guns against lightly armored ships. According to U.S. Navy logs, the American ships began evasive maneuvers almost immediately. Smoke screens were laid. Aircraft were launched with whatever weapons were available. There was no time to rearm properly. Some aircraft launched without bombs. Others carried depth charges or machine gun ammunition. The American commanders understood the situation clearly. They were outmatched. They were outgunned. And they had no realistic chance of victory in a conventional engagement. What followed was not a planned battle. It was a reaction. Destroyers moved forward aggressively, not because they could win, but because they had no other option. Ships like USS Johnston, USS Hull, and USS Samuel B. Roberts charged toward a vastly superior force. They launched torpedoes. They fired their guns. They attempted to disrupt enemy formations. The escort carriers turned away, launching aircraft continuously. Pilots were instructed to attack anything they could find. Fuel and ammunition limitations were ignored. The goal was not to defeat Kurita's fleet. It was to delay it. Japanese records later confirmed that Kurita's force initially believed it had encountered larger American carriers. Smoke, aggressive maneuvers, and constant air attacks created confusion. Kurita faced an unexpected situation. His fleet had already suffered losses earlier in the operation. Air attacks continued without pause. Reports from his commanders were incomplete and sometimes contradictory. Despite possessing overwhelming firepower, Kurita did not press the attack decisively. He maneuvered. He reassessed. He attempted to understand what he was facing. Meanwhile, American ships were being hit. USS Johnston was severely damaged. USS Hull took heavy fire. USS Samuel B. Roberts was struck repeatedly. Escort carriers were also hit. USS Gambier Bay was damaged and later sunk. Others narrowly avoided destruction. The fighting was intense, close range, and chaotic. According to after-action reports, communication was fragmented. Orders were improvised. Individual ship commanders made independent decisions. There was no overarching tactical plan, only survival. As the battle progressed, something unexpected happened. Kurita began to withdraw. Historians have debated this decision for decades. Some argue Kurita believed he was facing a stronger force. Others point to concern over air attacks and lack of air cover. Japanese records suggest uncertainty about fuel, damage, and mission priority. What is clear is that Kurita ordered his fleet to disengage. It's the opportunity to attack the invasion force at Leyte passed. Taffy 3 had survived, but survival came at a cost. Several American ships were sunk. Hundreds of sailors were killed. The unit was nearly destroyed. Yet its resistance altered the course of the battle. The battle off Samar did not end with a clear victory or defeat. It ended with questions. Why did Kurita withdraw? How close was Taffy 3 to total destruction? What role did confusion play on both sides? The answers are found not in legend, but in records. Logs, reports, and accounts written after the fact. This is not a story of perfect decisions. It is a story of uncertainty under pressure. And that is what makes it worth understanding. As the engagement off Samar intensified, the imbalance between the two forces became impossible to ignore. Kurita's center force possessed battleships, heavy cruisers, and destroyers built for surface combat. Their guns outranged anything Taffy 3 could bring to bear. Their armor could absorb punishment that escort carriers and destroyer escorts could not. Taffy 3, by contrast, consisted of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and for destroyer escorts. These ships were lightly armed. They were not intended to fight capital ships. Their mission was air support, not fleet combat. Yet the encounter forced them into direct confrontation. American destroyers moved forward aggressively, laying smoke and charging toward the Japanese formation. This was not an act of optimism. It was an act of necessity. USS Johnston was among the first to engage. According to after-action reports, Johnston accelerated toward the enemy line, closing the distance rapidly. She fired her guns and launched torpedoes at Japanese cruisers. The intent was disruption, not destruction. Torpedoes forced Japanese ships to maneuver. Gunfire drew attention away from the escort carriers. USS Hull followed a similar course. She charged through heavy fire, closing to torpedo range. Her attack forced further evasive action by the Japanese formation. USS Samuel B. Roberts, a destroyer escort, joined the assault. Despite being smaller and less heavily armed, she advanced toward enemy cruisers and opened fire. The actions of these ships were not coordinated by a single command directive. They were individual decisions made by ship captains under extreme pressure. Each commander understood the risk. Each knew that survival was unlikely. Meanwhile, the escort carriers turned south, launching aircraft continuously. There was no time for proper coordination. Pilots were instructed to attack any enemy ship they could reach. Many aircraft launched with whatever ordnance was available. Some carried depth charges instead of bombs. Others carried machine guns only. Despite this, the air attacks had a significant psychological and tactical effect. Japanese ships were forced to maneuver repeatedly. Formation integrity suffered. Command and control became more difficult. Japanese gunners faced constant air harassment. Smoke, splashes, and near misses reduced visibility. Kurita's flagship received multiple reports from subordinate commanders. The information was incomplete and sometimes contradictory. Some reports suggested the presence of fleet carriers. Others indicated heavy air resistance. Still others reported damage to Japanese ships. Kurita was operating under conditions of uncertainty. He had already lost. Ships earlier in the operation, fuel consumption was a concern. Air cover was limited. Japanese doctrine emphasized decisive battle, but also preservation of force for future operations. Kurita faced a dilemma: press the attack and risk further losses, or withdraw and preserve what remained of his fleet. As the battle continued, American losses mounted. USS Johnston took heavy damage. Her speed was reduced. She continued to fight until her guns were destroyed and flooding became uncontrollable. USS Hull was hit repeatedly. She suffered catastrophic damage and eventually sank. U.S. Samuel B. Roberts was struck by multiple shells. She continued firing until her ammunition was exhausted. She later sank after sustaining critical damage. Escort carriers were also hit. USS Gambier Bay was struck by heavy gunfire. She lost speed, took on water, and eventually capsized and sank. Other escort carriers narrowly avoided destruction. Smokescreens and evasive maneuvers saved them repeatedly. Throughout the engagement, American communications were fragmented. Radio messages were sent under fire. Some signals were misunderstood. Others were delayed. Despite this, the American ships continued to fight. Not because they believed victory was possible, but because withdrawal without resistance would mean annihilation. Japanese records later indicate that Kurita believed he was facing a stronger force than he actually was. The aggressive destroyer attacks, constant airstrikes, and smokescreens contributed to this impression. The presence of Yamato did not resolve the confusion. Although she fired her main guns during the engagement, her role was limited by visibility, maneuvering requirements, and command uncertainty. The battle did not unfold as a clear surface engagement. It was fragmented, disjointed, chaotic. Kurita's force did not concentrate its fire effectively. Targets appeared and disappeared behind smoke. Air attacks forced constant course changes. As the morning wore on, Kurita reassessed his position. His mission had been to attack Allied landing forces. Instead, he was engaged with a force that continued to resist aggressively. He faced the risk of continued air attack. He lacked reliable information about the broader operational situation. He did not know the exact location of American fleet carriers. At approximately mid-morning, Kurita made his decision. He ordered his force to disengage and withdraw. The order surprised both sides. For the Americans, it meant survival. For the Japanese, it meant the end of their opportunity to strike the invasion fleet. The withdrawal was orderly, but cautious. Japanese ships maintained defensive formations. American aircraft continued to harass them, but without decisive effect. As Kurita's force pulled away, the immediate threat to Taffy 3 ended. The battle off Samar was over. It had lasted only a few hours, but its impact extended far beyond that morning. American losses were severe. Several ships had been sunk. Hundreds of sailors were dead or missing. Yet the invasion at Leyte continued. The Japanese surface threat was neutralized. The outcome was not the result of superior firepower. It was the result of resistance under uncertainty. The battle off Samar did not follow textbook doctrine. It defied expectations on both sides. It remains one of the most studied naval engagements of World War II precisely because it resists simple explanation. It was not a planned stand. It was not a calculated sacrifice. It was a series of decisions made under pressure, recorded imperfectly, and remembered differently depending on perspective. And that is why the official records matter. They show a battle shaped not by legend, but by confusion, improvisation, and limits. Limits of information, limits of command, limits of certainty. The decision by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita to withdraw has become the most debated element of the battle off Samar. At the moment the order was given, Kurita still possessed overwhelming surface firepower. Several of his ships were damaged, but the core of his force remained intact. The American invasion fleet at Leyte lay largely undefended by heavy surface units. On paper, the opportunity still existed. Yet the situation Kurita faced was not the one later observers would reconstruct from maps and hindsight. It was fragmented, confusing, and shaped by incomplete information. Japanese command and control during the engagement was severely strained. Smoke obscured visibility. Air attacks continued without pause. Radio communications between ships were intermittent. Kurita did not have a clear picture of what forces opposed him. Reports from subordinate commanders varied widely. Some indicated contact with multiple aircraft carriers. Others reported intense air resistance beyond what escort carriers alone would normally generate. Still others emphasized the damage sustained by Japanese ships. Kurita also lacked reliable information about the wider operational situation. He did not know that American fast carriers were temporarily absent from the immediate area. He did not know. Text removed to fit 2950 word limit. Invasion at Leyte continued. In purely tactical terms, the Americans had suffered heavy losses. In operational terms, the Japanese had failed to achieve their objective. This imbalance between tactical loss and strategic outcome would define how the battle was later interpreted. In the days following the engagement, U.S. Navy commanders compiled after-action reports. These documents were factual, restrained, and cautious. They did not frame the battle as a miracle. They did not claim decisive victory. They recorded damage, losses, actions taken under pressure. Individual ship commanders submitted their own accounts. These reports often differed in detail. Times did not always match. Distances varied. Observations conflicted. This was not evidence of error. It was evidence of chaos. Naval historians reviewing these records later would note how fragmented the battle had been. There was no single perspective from which the entire engagement could be seen clearly. Each commander understood only a portion of the fight. Japanese records tell a similar story. Kurita's reports emphasize uncertainty. They note repeated air attacks, confusion over the strength of American forces, concern about losses already sustained. Japanese commanders did not describe the engagement as a retreat under fire from inferior forces. They described it as a disengagement under unfavorable conditions. The distinction matters. It highlights how differently the same event can be perceived depending on position and information. After the war, as records became available and historians compared accounts from both sides, the battle off Samar began to acquire its modern reputation. It was described as an example of extraordinary resistance, of smaller ships confronting overwhelming force, of individual initiative under extreme pressure. These interpretations are not incorrect, but they are incomplete. What makes Samar remarkable is not that it was a planned stand. It was not. It is remarkable because it demonstrates how outcomes can be shaped by uncertainty, misperception, and decision-making under stress. Kurita did not withdraw because he was defeated. He withdrew because he could not be certain of success. Taffy 3 did not survive because it was stronger. It survived because it created doubt. This distinction is critical. The battle did not hinge on firepower alone. It hinged on information, or rather, the lack of it. Smokescreens, aggressive maneuvers, constant air attacks, and the willingness of American destroyers to charge all contributed to an impression of greater resistance than actually existed. At the same time, Japanese command limitations prevented Kurita from forming a clear picture of the situation. He did not know that American fast carriers were not immediately present. He did not know how close he was to the invasion fleet. He did not know how vulnerable that fleet truly was. Historians continued to debate what might have happened if Kurita had pressed the attack. Some argue that Taffy 3 would have been destroyed. Others point out that continued air attacks and mounting confusion could have produced further Japanese losses without guaranteeing success. The records do not allow a definitive answer. What they allow is an understanding of constraints. Both sides operated at the edge of what their systems could handle. Communication was strained. Situational awareness was limited. Decisions were made with incomplete data. In that environment, hesitation can be as decisive as action. The Battle off Samar has sometimes been portrayed as a singular moment of heroism. That framing, while emotionally compelling, risks obscuring its deeper lesson. The lesson is not that courage alone can overcome overwhelming odds. It is that modern warfare depends as much on perception and information as it does on weapons. Samar illustrates how easily powerful forces can be misled, how quickly confidence can erode, and how fragile command certainty can be. For the U.S. Navy, the battle reinforced the importance of flexibility, initiative, and decentralized decision-making. Individual ship commanders acted without waiting for orders. Pilots attacked without perfect coordination. Crews adapted in real time. These actions did not follow doctrine, but they worked. For the Japanese Navy, Samar highlighted the limits of surface power without reliable air cover and clear intelligence. Even the presence of Yamato could not compensate for uncertainty. In the years after the war, the battle off Samar became a subject of study at naval academies, not as a blueprint to be copied, but as a case study in complexity. It resists clean conclusions. It does not offer a single lesson. It offers many. It shows that numerical superiority does not guarantee success, that hesitation can alter outcomes, that small forces can shape decisions far beyond their apparent strength. It also reminds us of the human cost behind these abstractions. The sailors who fought off Samar were not thinking in terms of strategy or legacy. They were thinking about survival, about their ships, about their crewmates. Many did not survive. Their actions are preserved not because they fit a heroic narrative, but because they were recorded. Logs, reports, testimony, these records allow us to reconstruct what happened without turning it into myth. That is why the battle off Samar still matters. It's not because it was a miracle, not because it was impossible, but because it was real. It shows how wars are actually fought, in uncertainty, in confusion, with imperfect information, and how, sometimes, those conditions are enough to change history. The invasion at Leyte succeeded. The Japanese surface fleet never again mounted a comparable threat. The Pacific War moved toward its conclusion. Off Samar, that outcome was not guaranteed. It emerged from a series of decisions made under pressure by people who could not see the whole picture. That is the quiet truth contained in the records. And it is why this battle continues to be studied, questioned, and remembered. Not for the legend, but for the reality behind it.